Lisa stood at the top of the water slide as staff rushed to stop her, informing her she was over the weight limit. Lisa insisted she weighed only 299 pounds. She marched straight to the slide entrance, ignoring all warnings, and plopped herself down on the slide. The staff had no choice but to push her down with all their might. Lisa was having a blast, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Two lifeguards watched in stunned silence. Just as she neared the bottom, Lisa shot out like a landmine. Meanwhile, downstream in the water park, several children played oblivious to the fact their day of fun was about to end. Next, it was Emma's turn on the water slide. The connecting pipe suddenly snapped. She frantically braced herself with her arms against the dry area to slow down. Hearing the screams, lifeguards swiftly jumped down and slid along the pipe. Emma's strength was nearly spent, half her body already suspended in midair. She clung desperately to the slide's edge, hanging precariously. Seeing Emma was about to meet disaster, visitors below noticed the emergency and began climbing the slide barehanded. They quickly reached Emma's side. The lifeguard, hindered by the swift current, could only move cautiously and slowly. Emma's strength rapidly depleted, teetering on the brink of falling. At the critical moment, the lifeguard finally reached her. Firmly grasping her arm, they pulled Emma back to safety. John hoisted the heavy iron ball and plunged into the deep sea. As a world-class magician, he intended to demonstrate an extreme escape trick. Unexpectedly, the key slipped out midway. By the time John realized it, he sensed something was terribly wrong. Time ticked away relentlessly. John's brain began to starve for oxygen, and his consciousness grew hazy. Staring at the pebbles scattered across the seabed, finding the key seemed utterly impossible. He frantically tugged at the chains to no avail. By this point, John had been submerged for 8 minutes. The audience watched in bewilderment, assuming he was attempting a world record. His female partner, Betty, sensed something was wrong. She quietly slipped into the water from behind and quickly located the distressed John. Betty immediately supplied him with oxygen and began searching frantically for the key. Fortunately, Betty found the key swiftly and handed it to John just as he was about to collapse. He surfaced calmly and completed this life-or-death magic act with composure. The paramedics saw cerebrospinal fluid leaking from Susan's ear and her body completely unresponsive. They knew something was terribly wrong. This was classic decapitation. When Susan fell from the climbing wall, her first cervical vertebra snapped cleanly. Her head and neck were held together by skin and soft tissue alone. The slightest movement could be fatal. The two seasoned paramedics felt their hearts sink. This was a tough case. The team leader reassured them while explaining the situation. They'd need a specialized stretcher for transport. The scoop stretcher slid into place beneath Susan with a click. As the locking mechanism tightened, the entire team held their breath. The team leader counted down from 3. They lifted Susan's head just 1 centimeter, carefully lowering the stretcher beneath her. Then they placed 2 head pads on either side and secured them with tape. This simple procedure left everyone drenched in sweat. All that remained was to get her safely to the hospital. Linda, aboard the hot air balloon, witnessed a terrifying scene, the balloon drifting steadily toward the wind turbine array. Everyone realized the danger. Paul immediately increased the gas valve, quickly crouched down, and fastened his seatbelt. The 4 could only silently pray the balloon would accelerate upward and avoid disaster. However, the expected ascent never happened. The blades suddenly sliced through the edge of the basket, and 1 passenger was swept out by the airflow. The balloon swayed precariously like a broken kite. Fortunately, the basket gradually stabilized, and the remaining 3 miraculously survived. But a splinter had pierced Paul's femoral artery. Jenny hastily tore off her shirt and tightly bound it above the wound to stop the bleeding. As Paul regained consciousness, he immediately instructed Jenny to close the gas valve. They needed to ascend further. Otherwise, they would suffocate. Just then, Jenny heard a cry. Turning, she saw David falling, clutching the safety rope and dangling midair. Jenny crawled to the basket's edge, reaching repeatedly but unable to grasp him. David began swinging harder, but his force was too great. He suddenly lost his grip, leaving only the safety rope. As time passed, the balloon descended steadily. Worse still, they drifted out over the ocean. For 3 complete non-swimmers, falling now meant certain death. In desperation, Jenny suddenly spotted a cruise ship approaching. She frantically waved for help. The passengers noticed them but mistook the gestures for friendly waves and waved back. Paul excitedly stood up to demonstrate their peril, only to slip and fall into the sea. Jenny hastily threw down the rope, but it was too long for Paul to reach. In desperation, she secured the safety line to Linda, hoping she could descend to rescue him. Linda, terrified of water, resisted fiercely. As Paul sank beneath the waves, Jenny secured the rope to herself, yet she froze in place, helplessly watching the sea swallow Paul. Soon, the surface grew still. Watching the cruise ship drift further away, Jenny clutched Linda tightly. She decisively slashed her palm, writing SOS in blood before raising the distress signal with all her strength. Yet the revelers aboard the yacht, lost in their revelry, remained oblivious to their distress. Despair gripped them once more. To make matters worse, the hot air balloon continued its descent. The lighter, having sunk with Paul, lay lost beneath the sea. Jenny raised a champagne bottle, attempting to refract sunlight into sparks. Repeated attempts ended in failure. Then, spotting a condom, Jenny had an idea. She quickly unwrapped it, slipped it over the bottle's mouth, poured in vodka, and watched it inflate into a transparent water balloon. Jenny directed Linda to place banknotes behind the balloon. Soon, the paper began to smoke. Excitedly, she lit the flame, reigniting the gas valve. The balloon slowly ascended, bringing them slight comfort. Though the crisis remained unresolved, they gathered fabric, secured it to a wooden pole, and extended it toward the fire source above. The burning fabric produced black smoke to attract attention. At this point, the fuel could only last another 30 minutes. Jenny tried to call for help with her phone, but there was no signal. Linda had another idea. She pried open the phone's back cover and pointed to a small hole inside, saying, "This is a signal booster." She detached a wire from the tether and inserted it into the phone. Sure enough, 2 bars of signal appeared. But just as she dialed, the phone shut down from depleted battery. Jenny lost her last shred of willpower and let the balloon drift aimlessly. Soon the gas ran out. Climbing onto the basket's top to avoid seawater, they watched the balloon begin its descent. Dazed, they stood on the tilting basket as the water rose relentlessly. 5 minutes later, the balloon sank completely, floating on the surface, their strength rapidly drained. Just then, the empty gas cylinder surfaced. Jenny dragged the dazed Linda to grab the buoyant bottle. Though temporarily supported, the icy water turned Linda's face blue. Jenny suddenly spotted a massive tanker hurtling toward them in the distance. They frantically swam sideways to avoid the hull, only to see hope slip away once more. Suddenly, a distant ship's horn blared. The earlier plume of black smoke had alerted personnel on shore. In the instant of rescue, the 2 women embraced and wept. Mike awoke from sunbathing to find himself trapped in quicksand, his body sinking deeper by the second. He frantically called for help. His companions sensed something was wrong and rushed over, but the surrounding quicksand continued collapsing. They dared not approach Mike recklessly. His friends swiftly threw a towel for Mike to grab. They strained to pull him up, but he sank deeper. When he suddenly lost his grip, panic set in. Mike began making his final wishes, entrusting his wife and children to their care. Seeing Mike's plight, Jennifer immediately urged her friends to call 911. She dashed to the beach, laid her skateboard flat on the sand, and crawled toward Mike, halting his descent. In the critical moment, before Mike was completely submerged, his companion handed him a plastic hose to aid his breathing. Just then, the rescue team arrived. The captain decisively lowered a steel cable into the pit, wrapping it around Mike's arm. As the cable slowly retracted, they finally pulled Mike to safety. In sub-zero temperatures, Lisa hung from a window wearing only her pajamas, her hands clutching the pipe for dear life. Downstairs, John, dressed in the identical pajamas, shouted frantically, clearly caught red-handed in an affair. Rescue team members immediately rushed to calm Lisa down, while Captain Ryder swiftly deployed the ladder truck for the rescue. In the -10 degrees Celsius environment, Lisa's feet trembled uncontrollably, and she was at constant risk of falling. Ryder reached Lisa's side, immediately wrapping her in a blanket to warm her up and preparing to bring her down. But at that moment, Lisa said her hands had completely frozen to the pipe. When the crew pulled out a chainsaw, they discovered it was dead. At that critical moment, Ryder spotted a passerby below holding a thermos. He immediately grabbed the hot coffee and poured it over the frozen pipe. The extreme contrast of ice and fire sent Lisa into a series of agonized screams, but soon her hands were finally freed. Back on solid ground, John rushed over to show concern, completely ignoring his wife's livid expression. The crew members could only express their helplessness. Boy ran away from home. He encountered police officer Lisa. Unexpectedly, the boy was frightened by her skin color and turned and ran away. Lisa wanted to call him to stop, but instead forced him into a dead end. In his panic, the boy jumped into the sewer, and the rushing water swept him away instantly. Lisa quickly called for backup and asked the firefighters to rush to the scene to save him. Soon, the firefighters arrived at the scene. Captain Mike analyzed the direction and speed of the water flow, as well as the drainage map, to determine the possible route the boy might have taken. He then dispatched firefighters to check every sewer along the route. Finally, their efforts paid off. The boy's handprints appeared on the wall of a sewer pipe. Based on this crucial clue, They identified a manhole where the boy might have passed through. Everyone boarded the fire truck and rushed to the intercept point. The captain instructed Maya to put on her equipment and prepare to enter the water early to rescue the boy. However, the equipment malfunctioned, and there was no oxygen in the oxygen mask. The captain, considering the safety of his team members, strongly demanded that the oxygen equipment be replaced. Just as they turned around, the boys' cries for help echoed from the sewer. What they didn't expect was that Andy had jumped in without any equipment. In the sewer, Andy struggled to grab the boy, but the swift current caused him to lose his balance. By the time he managed to struggle out of the sewage, the boy was nowhere to be seen. Not only had they failed to save the boy, but they now had to spend extra time rescuing Andy. They checked the map and quickly predicted the next intercept point, which would also be their last chance to rescue Andy. Under the captain's leadership, everyone quickly moved to the new location, but when they arrived at the target location, they were stunned by the scene before them. How were they going to get down into such a small manhole to rescue someone? So the captain ordered someone to fetch a hand drill to enlarge the manhole. Jack looked at the narrow well opening and suddenly had a bold idea. He said, "Why don't we let the little boy climb up himself?" Maya was immediately awakened from her dream. She quickly fetched a life ring and threw it into the sewer. At this moment, the boy was leaning against a thin piece of scrap steel to avoid being washed away by the rushing water. The firefighter told him to let go of the steel and grab the life ring, but the boy was too scared to let go. At this moment, the boy's father rushed over and encouraged him to be brave for his sick mother. It turned out that the boy's mother was seriously ill and about to die. Unable to accept this terrible fact, he ran away from home. In the end, the boy's belief in his mother overcame his fear. He jumped against the strong current and finally grabbed the life preserver. When he returned to the ground, he couldn't even believe that he had succeeded. The surrounding crowd erupted in applause. Seeing the father and son tightly embracing each other, Andy's heart finally settled.